Good evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees and here are today's top stories. The UK announces people over 50 years old will be offered a COVID booster jab ahead of winter. The government today accepting the advice of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation.
We know that this winter could quite possibly be bumpy at times, and we know that other respiratory viruses such as flu and RSV are highly likely to make their returns.
Vaccine rollout to 12 to 15-year-olds. Children in England will be offered one dose of the Pfizer jab from next week. However, it will not require parental consent in all cases. And lecturers at UK universities worry that Chinese students who attend remotely are spied on. The government starts rolling out its Winter Plan A next week, with booster jabs for the over 50s. There's also a Plan B if a new wave of the pandemic kicks in. NTD's Eddie Aitken has the latest.
Health Secretary Sajid Javid says COVID booster jabs will roll out to anyone over 50 in England next week. He says he has accepted the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, or JCVI's, advice, and the NHS is preparing the doses.
The NHS will contact people at the right time, and nobody needs to come forward at this point. This booster programme, it will protect the most vulnerable through the winter months and strengthen our wall of defence even further.
The Health Secretary says the boosters and jabs for 12 to 15-year-olds are part of the government's Winter Plan A. There is also a Winter Plan B to tackle any new wave of the pandemic.
These measures would be communicating clearly and urgently to the public the need for caution, legally mandating face coverings in certain settings, and whilst we're not going ahead with mandatory vaccine-owning COVID status certification now, we'll be holding that power in reserve. As well as these three steps, we'd consider a further measure of asking people to work from home if they can for a limited time, if that is supported by the data.
The JCVI suggests over 50s take the booster jab no earlier than 6 months after the second dose.
And as I said, it is deployed in the same order as it was deployed in phase 1. Hopefully, this will mean that the levels of protection that people have will be highest during the coldest months of the winter.
England's Deputy Chief Medical Officer says the boosters will be done in a purposeful way rather than a rushed way.
We know that this winter could quite possibly be bumpy at times, and we know that other respiratory viruses such as flu and RSV are highly likely to make their returns. So, with all of that in mind, the name of the game, the mantra if you like, is to stay on top of things.
People under 50 but living and working in elderly care homes and frontline health and social care workers are also eligible for booster jabs. All those who are clinically extremely vulnerable and anyone aged 16 to 65 and an at-risk group can also get the jab. This is estimated to be around 30 million people. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
England will offer one dose of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine to all children aged 12 to 15 from next week. If a parent withholds consent, the child can make the decision themselves after being deemed legally competent. NTD's Joy Duguid brings us this report.
Vaccines Minister Nadhim Zahawi says all children aged 12 to 15 will be offered one dose of the Pfizer jab from next week. This follows advice from the UK's chief medical officers.
We have some of the best clinical advice in the world, and I think it's only right that we listen to that and proceed as carefully as we can as we transition this virus from pandemic to endemic.
Zahawi says the school-age immunisation service will deliver the bulk of vaccinations, and the supply is not a problem. He also says both parents and children will get information about the vaccination.
That the consent process is being handled by each school in their usual way and will provide sufficient time for parents to provide their consent. Children aged 12 to 15 will also be provided with information.
But if a parent withholds consent when a child wants to be vaccinated, the child can make the decision themselves after being deemed to be legally competent by a panel.
If that is unsuccessful, then if the child is deemed to be Gillick competent, it's something that is very much the law of the land has been for other vaccination programmes, then that vaccination will proceed.
The Deputy Chairman of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, or JCVI, says he feels uncomfortable. Professor Anthony Harnden tells the BBC's Today programme it's less likely that a 12 or 13-year-old will be deemed competent to make the decision. The JCVI doesn't recommend mass vaccination of 12 to 15-year-olds, saying the benefit is only marginal. Joy Duguid, NTD News.
As the UK's chief medical officers recommend a single dose of the vaccine to healthy children aged 12 to 15, it's brought up to the issue of parental consent. The vaccines minister says children could make a decision against their parents' wishes, but only following a meeting with a clinician. Here's NTD's Jane Worrell with more on this.
The Prime Minister confirms he's taking the advice from the chief medical officers who gave the green light for one vaccine dose for healthy children aged 12 to 15, despite scientific advice.
And we're now intensifying that effort, offering jabs to 12 to 15-year-olds on the advice of the chief medical officers.
Responding to a question in the Commons earlier, Health Secretary Sajid Javid says parents will need to give consent, but in rare situations children may override their parents' wishes if they are seen as competent.
Where there is a difference of opinion, perhaps between the parent and the child, then the school-age immunisation service will try to reach a consensus, bring both parties together, and only in those rare situations where they cannot reach a consensus, then the process that is followed, called Gillick competence, is a process by which it would have to be determined if the child in question is competent enough to make decisions regarding their own health. And in general, I am told that the older the child, the more likely there is to be a decision that they are competent enough. But I can stress that this is the process followed for decades now under successive governments, and we won't be changing that process.
Similarly, the Vaccines Minister told media that parents will need to give consent, but if there's a difference of opinion, a clinician will speak to the parent and child to see if they can reach consent. If there's no consensus, then he said the child could decide to have the vaccine if they are deemed competent, what's known as Gillick competency. Retired paediatrician Ross Jones explains the context.
I think Mrs Gillick was a bit upset that her name got applied to this. Mrs Gillick took her local health authority to a judicial review to say that they shouldn't be able to give her young daughters contraceptives without her knowledge and approval. She'd got, I think, 4 daughters under 16. And actually, she lost the case. And it was agreed that if a GP had spent time with a 14, 15-year-old and had really talked through, you would always try to persuade them to, tell their parents. But if the downside of not giving the child the contraception was that they were going to continue having unprotected sex and then maybe an unwanted pregnancy, then the GP could decide that the child really did understand what they were doing and it was in the child's best interest to have this treatment even if they wouldn't tell their parents about it. So that was the context. And it has been used for a few things since then. There's been a very recent court case over somebody with gender reassignment saying that they were allowed to make a decision when they were only 14 and now aged 24 they're greatly regretting the decision and feeling they hadn't really understood it fully, and they've been to the High Court and it's been stated that actually Gillick competence shouldn't have been used in that situation.
She says with vaccines, children are subject to peer pressure and celebrity endorsements. Government guidance on immunisation says where someone aged 16 or 17 years consents to vaccination, a parent cannot override that consent. If a Gillick competent child consents to treatment, a parent cannot override that consent. It also says if a person aged 16 or 17 years or a Gillick competent child refuses treatment, that refusal should be accepted. Jane Worrell, NTD News, London.
First Minister Nicola Sturgeon confirms the rollout of COVID vaccines for 12 to 15-year-olds in Scotland. The offer of a single dose of the Pfizer vaccine is set to begin on Monday. Sturgeon says Scotland will make use of drop-in clinics and appointments allowing parents to be present. She says all 12 to 15-year-olds will receive a letter inviting them to an appointment. Following that, there will be a further programme of vaccination in schools. Sturgeon also confirms the rollout of booster vaccines to all adults over 50, frontline health and care workers and people at risk. Northern Ireland and Wales also gave the go-ahead to jabs for 12 to 15-year-olds today. And in other news, worker numbers have bounced back to pre-pandemic levels as vacancies hit a record high. Data by ONS show a strong recovery taking place in the jobs market. NTD's Neil Woodrow brings us the details.
The latest Office for National Statistics data has pleased the Chancellor of the Exchequer. It shows the number of UK workers on payrolls rose by 241,000 between July and August, reaching pre-pandemic levels. The positive figures continue as the rate of unemployment dropped again to 4.6%, in line with analyst predictions. Job vacancy numbers soared by 249,000 to more than 1 million. It's the first time since records began, as the UK experiences labour shortages in some key industries. Challenges remain, however, as ONS surveys show well over 1 million payroll workers are still on furlough, and the hospitality sector recorded the highest proportion of employers reporting their job openings are hard to fill. Chancellor Rishi Sunak on Tuesday said it's a sign the government's plan for jobs is working, adding there were fewer potential redundancies notified in August than at any point since the start of last year. Neil Woodrow, NTD News.
The UK's largest supermarket group, Tesco, is testing reusable packaging on 88 products, including laundry detergent, food and drinks. NTD's Patrick Hayden has more.
Tesco's on Monday launched refill options for food, drink, household and beauty products in reusable packaging. It's part of the supermarket's strategy to cut plastic waste. Supermarket chains and consumer groups are increasingly testing refills to help cut single-use plastics. Tesco has teamed up with global reusable packaging platform Loop for 10 of its stores in East England. Customers will be able to buy products in reusable packaging that can then be returned to stores when finished. Loop then cleans the packaging for reuse. Founder and CEO of Loop, Tom Zaki, says to reassure customers on hygiene concerns, we are partnered with Ecolab, a global leader in hygiene and infection prevention solutions. Tesco Chief Executive Ken Murphy said, we'll learn as much as we can from this to inform our future packaging plans. Tesco says the prices of the contents of each item are comparable to the original. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
Lecturers are concerned that Chinese students attending UK universities remotely are risking legal consequences. British newspaper The Times reports Chinese spies might be able to monitor their discussions in online classrooms for censored political content. Chinese students who cannot attend classes in the UK due to pandemic restrictions must attend remotely. At least 5 British universities make their Chinese students log in via servers based in China. They are hosted by Chinese company Alibaba with ties to the Chinese communist regime. Edinburgh University is one such university. Its director of the Institute for Academic Development says students or staff could put themselves at risk by sharing their views on some topics. The Association for Asian Studies fears its students could even end up in jail. Still to come, for several decades, scientists have been trying to prove that abundant clean energy from fusion technology is possible. Now, they've come one step closer. That and more after the break. Footage shows Border Force carrying out exercises in the English Channel where jet skis surround a small boat containing people and tow it away. It's thought to be training exercises on how to deal with dinghies containing migrants. So far this year, over 14,000 people have crossed the channel in small boats. NTD's Joy Duguid has the details.
In exercises off the coast of Dover, Border Force jet skis manoeuvre around a dinghy while larger vessels are stationed nearby. In another exercise, a dinghy with passengers is surrounded and turned back. The Home Office doesn't comment on the exercises, but a department spokeswoman says they are testing a range of safe and legal options for stopping small boats. On Monday, over 30 migrants were rescued off the English coast after crossing from France. Among the migrants are women and children. One woman is tended to by Border Force health officials after appearing unwell. According to the Press Association, between September the 4th and the 10th, nearly 2,000 migrants arrived in the UK by crossing the Channel. This sets a new record for any 7-day period in this year. At least 14,400 people have crossed to the UK on small boats this year. Early on Monday morning, 2 migrants were stopped in a small dinghy off the coast of northern France by police.
I come from Ethiopia. I tried to go to UK since a long time. And yesterday we would try together with my friend and too much people. Then the policeman come and take boat and motor, everything.
Last week, the Home Office said that UK Border Force could intercept boats and send them back to French waters. This plan is controversial. Opposition politicians and refugee groups say turning back boats in the Channel would be impractical, dangerous and illegal. The French Interior Minister says France will not accept such practices and they breach maritime laws. Joy Duguid, NTD News.
A German institute is arguing that any future lockdown apply only to unvaccinated people. The Munich-based IFO Institute suggests this would reduce economic losses than with a full-scale lockdown. The federally funded institute says restricting non-vaccinated people only would reduce GDP by 0.15% or £11 billion. That's compared to 0.6% if the lockdown applied to every German citizen. Some German states have already introduced rules that apply to unvaccinated people only in certain sectors like events or gastronomy. In Belgium, the regional government of Brussels is preparing to make the health pass mandatory for entering bars and restaurants. This is part of efforts to get more young people vaccinated. NTD's Joy Duguid has more on this.
As the regional government is trying to push young people to get vaccinated, Brussels is preparing to make the health pass mandatory for entering bars and restaurants. Residents would also be required to show the pass in fitness clubs and trade fairs from October the 1st.
Now it has almost become mandatory to be vaccinated to do an internship. Some hospitals refuse to offer internships if we are not vaccinated. This is one of the reasons why I decided to do it.
In Brussels, 44% of 18 to 24-year-olds have received a first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, compared to 71% in neighbouring Wallonia.
Personally, I am vaccinated and I am in favour of vaccination, but I am not in favour of being forced to do something. It should remain a matter of free choice.
The Brussels government has already approved the wider use of the health pass. Flanders and Wallonia are yet undecided. In practice, it could mean that someone who is not vaccinated could travel 10 minutes outside of Brussels for a drink or a meal. Bars and restaurants are also worried they will have to implement checks.
We have no role to play here. We are not the police. We are not responsible for public order. We are only restaurant, hotel and cafe operators. When it comes to us, it's about conviviality and not about police restrictions.
More than 72% of Belgium's 11 million population have been vaccinated. Joy Duguid, NTD News.
Scientists at the largest fusion reactor in the world in southern France are working hard to prove that large-scale clean energy through nuclear fusion is possible. Now, they've come one step closer. NTD's Eddie Aiken explains.
Last week, part of a massive magnet arrived in the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, or ITER, in southern France. Its manufacturer says the 150-ton magnet is so powerful it can lift an aircraft carrier. ITER is the largest fusion reactor in the world. For the scientists here, the magnet brings them one crucial step closer to proving that it's possible to generate large-scale clean energy through nuclear fusion. Unlike existing fission reactors that produce radioactive waste, proponents of fusion say it offers a clean and virtually limitless supply of energy. Rather than splitting atoms, fusion mimics a process that occurs naturally in our Sun to meld two hydrogen atoms together and produce a helium atom, as well as a whole load of energy. Basically, it's a way of creating energy in the same way as the Sun.
If we try to do it back on the surface of the Earth, we don't have the pressure there. There's not the mass of the sun. So instead of that, we have to heat the atoms up very, very hot. So that when they're hot, they move very quickly, and when they hit each other, that sticks. They stick together, and you get the heat out. You call that nuclear heat. And that releases the fusion energy. Then you have to collect that with some form of what we call a blanket. It's a way of absorbing the energy. It makes steam, and then you can generate electricity.
Scientists here believe if they can establish proof by just doing it once, the technology will snowball. The International ITER project began in the 1980s, so the question is when. ITER spokesman Leban Koblenz argues the timescales can be shortened if the funds are there to allow the scientists to adopt novel technologies quickly. Strides made in medical technologies during the pandemic have proven that. Scientists say ITER is now 75% complete. They aim to fire up the reactor by early 2026. Eddie Aiken, NTD News.
35 years after the world's worst nuclear disaster, a new type of tourism for the exclusion zone has emerged. Cyclists are heading to Chernobyl for an active holiday with scenic routes. Here's NTD's Costemenes with the story.
Chernobyl is not a place that springs to mind when choosing a scenic cycle route. Cycling guide Natalie Tulyulyuk is hoping to change that, leading the first season of cycling trips to the zone.
You know, this idea is as old as I know. The Exclusion Zone administration wants to portray tourism in a different way. Until this year, it was only bus or car excursions. Cycling is something new and diverse.
The Exclusion Zone, covering 1,000 square miles, is dotted with unnerving nuclear warning notes. Tulyulyuk hopes that tourists will see the area in a new light.
This route was checked for radiation levels. We should follow the rules for visitors. For example, clothes should cover all of your body. Also, we can't deviate from the route.
The area attracts many tourists. Numbers increased significantly in 2019 thanks to popular TV series Chernobyl. In spite of a law prohibiting living in Chernobyl, some Ukrainians have moved there and are restoring abandoned houses.
I'm very happy to see guests. I wish for more and more guests.
People are forbidden from eating and drinking in the zone and are not allowed to travel in and out by themselves. Access to the area is limited to certain times. Cyclists are checked for radiation levels before they leave the zone. Costemenes, NTD News.
In the south of France, a treasure has been under the care of a community of monks for centuries. A medieval abbey amidst the mountains. NTD's France correspondent David Vivez went to learn about their lives.
For about 1,000 years, this abbey has been cut off from walls and the harshness of the human world. A place atop a mountain in the Pyrenees in the south of France, where time seems to have stopped. Only the sound of bells and the songs of monks break the silence here. Speaking of which, we came on a day when monks were observing a vow of silence, but Brother Paul said it was okay to make an exception for us.
Welcome to Saint Martin du Canigou Abbey. This abbey was built in the year 1000. Benedictine monks have lived here for about 800 years. It is a jewel of Roman art. It is the first Roman art. You have here some of the most ancient arches in Europe.
The architecture evolved very quickly and allowed for new construction techniques, which would allow the first cathedrals to be built in Europe.
We have two types of architecture. The architect understood how to hold this enormous weight by building very thick stone walls.
After the abbey was built came an important moment, its consecration. Brother Paul says it invited the presence of Holy Spirit in the chapel.
The consecration allowed the building to be reserved for worship. The monks gathered here 7 times a day to praise the Lord.
During the Middle Ages, monks belonged to different communities or orders, such as Benedictines, Cistercians and Franciscans, which followed the spiritual practices of different saints. Though they lived a secluded life in monasteries, dedicating their life to meditation, these communities were considered an elite class in society. Monks were among the only people who knew how to read and write, so they were the keys to the transmission of knowledge. They would build churches, monasteries and abbeys, often in the midst of nature.
Benedictine monks always looked for deserted places far away from the city, looking for the beauty of nature. This garden is like the Garden of Eden, or the celestial Jerusalem. The beauty of nature always brings us back to God.
The architecture also echoes this wish. Monks cultivate the garden as they are cultivating their souls.
Everything has been built around this garden, and they were looking for beauty in architecture as well. For beauty elevates the soul, and it also brings us closer to our Creator.
Visitors have to make a long climb to reach the abbey. Passing this test of endurance allows them to witness the high mountain views. David Vives, NTD News.
Dozens of water athletes glided on the turquoise waters of France's Annecy Lake on Saturday at a race that promotes the new discipline of foil cycling. The sport allows cyclists to fly on water aboard pedal-powered boats. Here's NTD's Cos Jimenez with more.
Created by startup JetCycle, the boats are composed of a pedaling system and 2 foils that allow cyclists to take flight 7 to 12 inches over water at speeds up to 8 miles per hour. The athletes boarded the JetCycle boats in 2 racing events, an 820-foot sprint race and a half-a-mile regatta course. French Olympic gold medalist in rowing Mathieu Androdias also tested the vehicle during the 2-day meet. The JetCycle is currently in its final phase of industrialization. Cos Jimenez, NTD News.
That's the news for today, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Stuart Lees. Thank you for watching our daily news show on YouTube. You can also watch our other programming on channel 190 on Sky TV or on Freeview via channel box on channel 271. In the meantime though, please give this video a like and hit subscribe to our channel. Have a good day.